I'm going to show you some products and I want you to see if you can figure out what all these products have in common. This one is Kellogg's C3PO cereal, Gator Gum by Gatorade, Crystal Pepsi, the Hummer by GM, Blockbuster Stores, and the California Texas Oil Company. You would have guessed by now that all these are discontinued products, departments, or stores. For example, all the first few items that I showed you were discontinued products. Blockbuster actually discontinued some of their stores. A lot of the stores closed down. And the last company I showed you, the California Texas Oil Company, they decided to discontinue their stores in this region. So they don't do any sales in North America, but they do have operations in Africa, Middle East, and Asia. In this section, what we're going to learn is how a company decides whether to discontinue a product, a department, or a store. Things that a company needs to keep in mind if they're going to discontinue a product is whether the fixed costs that they have, will they continue to exist even if the product line is discontinued? A lot of times, a company cannot get rid of all their fixed costs if they get rid of a particular product. The next question they'll ask is, are there any direct fixed costs that can be traced to the product that will be avoided if the product line is discontinued? For example, when Caltex discontinued their North American segment, they can get rid of all their leases on their gas stations because those are direct fixed costs that can be avoided. When we do this analysis, we're going to use our incremental analysis for discontinuing a product. So any cost, any revenues from the discontinued product will be treated as loss of revenue, and any costs that we would have spent on that particular product will be shown as cost savings. So your decision rule on whether to discontinue a product, department, or store is that if your total lost revenues from discontinuing a product, department, and store is more than the cost savings, then do not discontinue. But if your total revenues are less than your cost savings, then go ahead and discontinue. We'll take a look at an example next. You can pause the video and take a minute to read the question. So the question they're asking is, they've got two products. Should we drop one of the products? Typically, whenever you're presented with a question like this, one of the product lines will be making a loss. If you notice in this case, the blankets line is making a loss of $2,300. So the question is, if the blankets are dropped, what would be the impact on total operating income of the company? Would we be able to increase our operating income by $2,300, which is the amount of the loss experienced by the blankets? The things that you'll be looking for whenever you are reading a question like this is to see whether any of the fixed costs can be avoided if we drop the blankets line. It says, assume that fixed costs are all unavoidable, and that also dropping one product would not impact sales of the other. That's another thing that you do want to make sure before you drop a line. If dropping one product affects sales of another product, then you want to make sure that you take that into consideration when you're doing your incremental analysis. For your incremental analysis, you would be picking the numbers from the blankets column because that is the column that we are going to get rid of. Your incremental analysis would look like this. You would have an expected decrease in revenue when you drop the blankets line. You would also expect a decrease in expenses, this would be a cost saving. And then you would take into account whether the expected increase or decrease in operating income results from those two items. First, let's take a look at expected decrease in revenues. If we drop our blankets line, currently it's earning a revenue of $9,500, so we would expect $9,500 decrease in revenues. those blankets also cost us $9,800 in variable expenses. So we would expect to save those variable expenses. We wouldn't have to spend those costs anymore, spend that money anymore on those costs. So that would be shown as a positive number because it's a cost saving. Now we also have to take into account any fixed expenses that we would save as a result of dropping this line. In this particular example, they told us that all fixed costs are unavoidable, which means that we will not be saving any fixed costs by dropping the blankets line. So these are the only two relevant items in our data that will affect if we drop the blankets line. We have a decrease in revenue of 9,500, a saving of 9,800, for a net effect of a saving of $300. So if we drop the blanket line, we save $300, which will go towards increasing our operating income. So our decision would be we should drop the blankets line. Now going back to the data, it showed us that the blankets line had a net loss of 2,300, but in our incremental analysis, we calculated that if we dropped the blankets line, we would not save that entire 2,300. We would only save $300. Why is that? If you notice the fixed costs here, the fixed costs are allocated. In Chapter 3, we said we took our total fixed costs that were expected to be incurred by the company divided by the allocation base and then allocated to our two products. And we allocated $3,000 to pillows and $2,000 of fixed cost to blanket, giving us a total $5,000 of fixed cost. But these $5,000 were allocated to blankets. They were not incurred by the blankets. They were incurred by the entire plant, but we just allocated $2,000 of those costs to the blankets. When we get rid of those blankets, we still have to incur the entire $5,000 in fixed costs. And this time, those $5,000 will all be allocated to the pillows product line. So since we don't save any fixed costs, that $2,000 of the 2,300 operating loss by the blankets will be absorbed by the pillows. So we would only result in a 3,300 profit overall, or an operating income overall.